Okay, so this next question is from Isaac, like I said. One thing that this quarantine has showed me is that it challenges, I think, people on multiple levels, Christian and I'm talking about faith issues and stuff like that. And one of those is this. And Isaac says, what do you say to people who are still afraid to have fellowship because of the rules in place, ? We've gotten some backlash from fellow Christians for inviting them over for normal fellowship dinners, being told that they're not rule breakers and we shouldn't be doing that. So before you answer, I just want to say real quick, one of the things with this whole thing, and again, I hate rules, even if they're good. If you tell me something, I'm immediately like, I don't want to do that, and that's fleshy. And one thing that I appreciate about this guy right here is that he's going above and beyond. I mean, even wearing the mask things, like part of me is like, I'm not doing that. I don't want to wear that. As soon as someone tells me to do that, it's like, listen, here's the science. I'm not going to do that. But he goes out of his way to not be fleshy and to appease people so that they don't have an excuse for what he's doing. And that's what the Bible calls us to do as Christians. And I see this being challenged on multiple facets of our society. And that's one thing that comes up. So what do you tell them?
Well, first off, again, I already talked about this. The Bible flat out says that we're supposed to be in fellowship, with each other. As far as keeping the rules go, I'm a rule keeper. It's like when I play a game, I go by the rules, and stuff like that. I don't like rules that are arbitrary. I don't like it when people, change the rules in the middle of the game, and that's a lot of what's going on with this whole thing. And I don't like rules that make no sense. Either. And so, that's my view on rules. I don't like making a bunch of rules for people just because I can. I hate that when I go to a government office and they just tell me no and they can't tell me why. And so I don't want to do that to other people.
I'm not sure what you're referring to.
Yeah.
Inside joke.
Yeah. And so, it's that kind of thing. And ultimately, if I was talking to somebody about this situation specifically, it's gone beyond what the governor first said that he wanted to do. And what he wanted to do was flatten the curve. The curve has been flattened, and we're on the other side of it. And now what he's done is he's extended this without end. I don't see an end in sight because he can move the goalposts any way that he wants to, and it's a lot of the restrictions are specifically pointed at church, and I don't think that that's something that is accidental. I think that there is an animus against Christians, and so. We can practice social distancing, and we can be careful with people, and I can guarantee you that I care about people more than most non-believers do. And so,
right.
Yeah,
and not to harp on the people that are, afraid of getting in trouble. Right?
You know what? As far as being afraid of getting in trouble, that's why we're going to continue to do the online studies.
Good point.
Yeah.
Good
And
point.
so if you're afraid of coming down, there are good reasons for that. Like I said, if you're over 65, first off, I'm educated on the mask issue, and so unless you have a respirator on, with something that's going to be small enough to filter out viruses. You're not going to be able to protect yourself from getting a virus from somebody else just because you're wearing a mask. Most of the reason that, I know people in the medical field, most of the reason that they're wearing masks in the medical field when they're doing surgeries and those kinds of things, it's not because they're afraid of getting something from the person that the surgery is being done on. It's because they're afraid of giving something to that person. And so what they're trying to do is stop bacteria specifically. Viruses are much smaller than bacteria. And so there's, when you're talking about masks, masks are going to help in some instances, but they're not a for sure thing unless you have a mask that qualifies for what I was talking about. It's got to be something that is specifically for use in viral instances and something that form fits your face. And so, again, what the masks are for is to keep me from spreading junk around. And, I think that that's valid, but that's even limited. And so, you gotta keep that in mind. Yeah.
So again, I'm not harping on the people that are afraid of getting in trouble, but I kind of see some of the stuff like this. I just went through 2 Timothy, taught on it, and Paul is in prison, and there's a whole persecution thing going on in Rome because of Nero and the whole starting the fire thing, and he's going after Christians, like killing them, crucifying them, like nasty persecution.
Right.
And there's a people that are in the faith that Paul harps on that won't come to visit them because if you come to visit Paul in prison, you're going to be known as a Christian.
Right.
And he tells Timothy, you don't do that. And
Right.
he says, you follow me in my suffering. And if you're a Christian, you can't get out of 2 Timothy without the fact that if you're a Christian, you embrace suffering for the gospel.
Right.
It's a mandatory thing, right?
Yep.
Even to give your life for this message.
Right.
And we live in a culture that, at least in my generation, I'm 37 years old, didn't do the World War II thing. We've never really been in persecution. We've always had freedoms in America. And there's kind of this softness where people are like, oh, well, if I do that, am I going to get in trouble? It's like this vastly different thing of Paul saying, follow me in death for the message of the gospel.
Right.
And then the other side where it's like, well, what will someone do to me,
Right.
And it seems like that this situation is kind of filtering, and I don't know. I don't want to read too much into it, but
Well, I think this is something that the Bible teaches is coming anyway.
Right.
And so obviously we've been in the book of Revelation for a while, and what the Bible says in the book of Revelation is that people are going to be persecuted for their faith. They're going to be killed for being Christians. And so one of the things that we're going to be seeing in our world as time goes on is more and more of a hatred towards Christianity and Christians specifically, and more and more of a persecution. It's got to get to the point where they kill off Christians and Jews. And so it's just amazing how quickly this whole thing shut down churches,
Hasn't it?
specifically.
Crazy.
Shut down churches. And that's always been something that I've been thinking about in this issue. As far as how far I'm going to allow this to go in the areas that I have control over, and it's a frightening thing in the sense that we have certain governors who are just taking powers that they don't have and demanding things, and not just governors but judges, like we were talking about earlier, and that kind of thing, and that needs to be resisted. Many times what people will say, they'll bring up Romans 13 where it talks about we need to submit ourselves to the governing authorities. I already showed a passage where Peter and John did exactly the opposite, and as you're saying, Paul did exactly the opposite. And it came to a point where if the governing authority told you to do something that was unbiblical, then you weren't to do it. And so, again, it's like I think that the first asking, and that's what it was an asking of churches to back down fellowship and that kind of thing. I think that was reasonable, and I think that that's fine. But it was predicated on the fact that they were going to blunt the curve, basically. And that's been done. And now it's out there, and it doesn't have an end. He gave a minimal date, 3 weeks for every phase, and that puts us out 3 months, and that's over the top. And that I didn't sign on for that. And so again, I'm commanded to do what God says rather than what men say in that situation. And like anything else in our lives, we need to make those kinds of stands. The reason that people don't take Christians seriously is because Christians aren't serious.
Yep, absolutely.
And we need to be serious about the things that God has said. And this is one of those areas that there's going to be creep here no matter what. Right now we've got a situation where, and again, I pay attention to stats. We don't have a denominator on this thing, you guys. We know how many people have died, kind of, because now they move the goalpost on what a COVID-19 death is.
Yes.
And so we don't even know for sure what has actually been COVID-19 deaths for about 3 weeks now, maybe longer than that. And so the numerator we're not sure about. The denominator in that whole thing, as far as ratios go, we have no idea what the denominator is. And what I mean by that is we don't know how many people have had this. We do know that more people have had it than has been listed. And so the numbers that you see on the Johns Hopkins site, as far as people who've had COVID-19, those are people who've been tested and they know that they've had it. We know that more people than have been tested have had this disease. And so that denominator is probably at least twice and probably way more than twice the number of people that have had it. And what that does is it makes the ratio of people who have died from this disease, it is not as high as they're stating it is. It is not. It's way lower than that. And so now we've got a situation where I was messing around with numbers, and 0.05% of people in Washington State, most likely, that's on the high end. 0.05% of people have died from COVID-19, of people who've had it in Washington State. And if the numbers are obviously higher than that, you got another issue altogether. I'm talking about the numbers of people who have gotten this. And so we have a disease right now with a death rate that is not all that out of line with what happens when people get the flu. What happens when we get a pandemic that has a death rate of 10%, not 0.05%, but 10%? Are they just going to shut churches down? Is that what we're going to do? And the Bible talks about the fact that there are going to be wars and rumors of wars and pestilences in various places. And so the commandment to gather together and the First Amendment do not cease to exist because there's a virus. Yeah, so anyway. I could,
Yeah, it's all truth though.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks for posting, Isaac. Appreciate it. That's a good question, man.